There we were, in what was supposed to be paradise, our luxurious anniversary getaway. But there I sat, alone in a corner of our plush hotel suite, staring out at the sprawling resort. The grandeur around me felt hollow, almost mocking, as Jack was glued to his phone, lost in an endless sea of business calls. It wasn't how I'd pictured our special weekend. It was supposed to be about us, about our love. But there I was, feeling like a ghost in my own marriage. I wandered down to the hotel bar that evening, seeking a refuge from the loneliness of my room. The bar was lively, a stark contrast to the silence I'd left behind. That's when I saw him, a charming stranger with a magnetic smile. He noticed my solitude, my forlorn glances, and struck up a conversation. It was innocent at first, casual chit-chat, but his attention was intoxicating. I hadn't felt seen or heard in so long, and here was someone who seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. The night took a spontaneous turn. We talked, laughed, and before I knew it, we were exploring the night together. The city's lights blurred into a kaleidoscope of colors as we wandered from one spot to another, losing track of time and the reality of my life. It was a thrill, a much-needed escape, but deep down I knew I was treading dangerous waters. I didn't expect Jack to return early, but he did. He walked in on a scene that was innocent yet compromising. The look on his face, a mix of hurt, betrayal, and anger, is etched in my memory. I tried to explain, to tell him it was nothing more than a fleeting escape from loneliness, but words failed me. He didn't say a word. His silence was deafening. Packing his bags in a hurried frenzy, he left the room, and within hours, he was on a flight back home, leaving me stranded in what now felt like a gilded cage. There I was, alone again, but this time the loneliness was suffocating. I called him repeatedly, leaving voicemails that oscillated between apologies and pleas for understanding. But it was to no avail. Jack was gone, and with him, the life I knew. The sun rose on a new day, but the warmth couldn't reach the cold dread that had settled in my heart. I was alone, truly alone, in a paradise that had turned into a purgatory of my own making. As I sat there, contemplating the ruins of my marriage, I realized that in one impulsive night, I had shattered the very thing I had yearned for. Love, attention, companionship. It was a bitter pill to swallow, a lesson learned in the hardest way possible. In this chapter of my life, I had played the part of my own antagonist, making choices that would haunt me far beyond this ill-fated anniversary trip. The consequences of that night were just beginning to unfold, and I was woefully unprepared for the storm that was about to hit. I never thought it would come to this. When I left the resort that morning, my mind was a whirlwind of betrayal and hurt. But as the plane soared above the clouds, a cold, hard reality set in. There she was, my wife, stranded in paradise without a dime to her name. My heart wanted to turn back, but my head pushed forward, fueled by anger and a sense of betrayal. From thousands of miles away, I heard the rumors trickle in. She wasn't alone for long. Some guy, a high roller, a gambler, had swooped in. They say he's the type who lives on the edge, playing with money like it's just a game. It made my blood boil. I pictured them, her and this stranger, heading to the city known for its dazzling casinos and reckless nightlife. My wife, who once frowned upon my small poker nights with friends, was now in the clutches of the gambling world. Each call from her was a mix of desperation and defiance. She spoke of the thrill, the rush of the game, the lights, the sounds, the people. It was like she was describing a dream, but to me, it was a nightmare. I couldn't understand. This wasn't the woman I married, the woman who valued security and stability. This was someone else, someone blinded by the false glitter of a gambler's paradise. The decision to file for divorce wasn't easy. It felt like signing away years of love, memories, and dreams. But with each passing day, the woman I loved seemed to drift further away into a world I couldn't reach. I had to protect myself, my assets, our future, what was left of it. Freezing our joint accounts was a tough call, but I saw it as a wake-up call for her, a hope that it might bring her back to reality. Sitting in my quiet, orderly home, the contrast to her new chaotic world couldn't be starker. I wondered how things spiraled so out of control. Was it my neglect, my constant work calls, or was it something deeper, a crack in our foundation that we failed to see? Each day brought new updates, her increasing debts, her immersion in the gambling lifestyle. The woman I thought I knew was now a stranger, lost in a world where every roll of the dice could mean fortune or ruin. I grappled with a mix of emotions, anger, guilt, sorrow, but beneath it all was a lingering love, a hope that somehow she would find her way back from the brink. This chapter in our lives was closing, one painful page at a time. The divorce papers, a stark reminder of our shattered vows, lay heavy on the table. It was a gamble that neither of us expected, A bet where we both lost more than we could ever have imagined. I still remember the day I sent those legal notices. Part of me hoped they'd jolt her back to reality, pull her away from that reckless world she'd plunged into. But it was like shouting into the void. She was too far gone, caught up in the whirlwind of her new life with that gambler. It wasn't long before the consequences of her actions started to catch up with her. Word got around that her new beau wasn't just a high roller, but was neck-deep in debts. I heard they were on the run, chased by the kind of people you don't want to owe money to. It was a world away from the life we had built together, a life that now seemed like a distant memory. Their flight from one city to another was like something out of a bad movie. I could picture it, the dodgy motels, the constant looking over the shoulder, the fear and uncertainty. And amidst all this chaos, she received the news about her mother's illness. It was a cruel twist of fate. Her mom, the woman who had always been her anchor, was now battling for her life, and she couldn't even afford to visit her. What pained me the most was hearing about the turn her relationship with the stranger took. The charm and excitement that had drawn her in had morphed into something dark and abusive. It was a toxic mix of fear, control, and desperation. I couldn't fathom how the woman I loved, who always stood up for herself, was now trapped in such a dangerous liaison. The worst part? She tried to leave him, but this guy, he was cunning, holding her past mistakes over her head like a sword, blackmailing her with the evidence of that night, that mistake that had torn our lives apart. It was manipulation at its ugliest. Sitting alone in our once shared home, I felt a mix of anger, frustration, and helplessness. The woman I had vowed to protect was now a shadow, lost in a world of danger and deceit. I wanted to reach out, to pull her from the mess she'd gotten into, but I knew my efforts would be in vain. She had chosen a path that led her away from me and into a nightmare of her own making. This chapter of our lives was one of despair and desperation. The bright, ambitious woman I had married was now running from the consequences of her gambles, both at the tables and in life. And I, once her partner and confidant, could do nothing but watch as her world spiraled out of control. I never imagined it would come to this. When she reached out to our old friends, seeking a lifeline, a bit of sympathy, maybe a place to crash, they all turned her away. I guess they couldn't wrap their heads around her choices, just like I couldn't. The same people who toasted to our happiness on our wedding day now closed their doors on her in her hour of need. Then came the news that knocked the wind out of me. She was pregnant. The thought of her out there with that guy bringing a child into their chaotic world, it was too much to bear. But in a twisted turn of fate, the guy she'd thrown everything away for gambled away their last bit of money. Every penny. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, knowing there was nothing I could do to stop it. The bottom fell out from their world quickly after that. Evicted from the dingy apartment they'd been calling home, they found themselves with nowhere to go. The streets became their refuge, a stark contrast to the life she once knew. I heard about it through the grapevine, the whispers of mutual acquaintances, each detail a stab to my heart, but the cruelest blow was yet to come. Amidst the hardship, the stress, the unforgiving reality of life on the streets, she lost the baby. A miscarriage. I can't begin to imagine the pain, the loss she must have felt. It was a tragedy, a painful reminder of how far she had fallen from the life we had shared. Sitting alone in our once happy home, I couldn't help but feel a wave of guilt wash over me. Had I been too harsh? Should I have reached out, offered support, despite everything? The weight of these questions hung heavy in my heart. Our once shared dreams, the plans for a future together, now lay shattered, lost in a spiral of bad choices and worse consequences. This chapter of our lives was marked by loss and heartache. A stark reminder of how quickly life can unravel when we lose sight of what truly matters. The woman I had loved, who had been my partner, my confidant, was now a stranger, fighting battles she never imagined, facing a reality she was ill-prepared for. And I, once her protector and ally, could do nothing but mourn the life we could have had. A life lost to the cruel twists of fate. Hey everyone! I hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you do, please take a moment to hit that like button. It really helps me out and lets me know you appreciate the content. Also, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. Subscribing is a great way to stay updated with all the latest videos and to be part of our growing community. It's quick, it's free, and it ensures you won't miss out on any upcoming content. So go ahead, smash that like button and hit subscribe. Your support means a lot and keeps this channel going. Thanks for watching. The day I heard she was seen begging for help on the streets, my heart sank. A former colleague of ours had spotted her, but instead of lending a hand, he walked away, still feeling the sting of her betrayal. It was a hard pill to swallow, knowing how far she'd fallen, and that those who once respected her now turned their backs. Things spiraled even further out of control when that gambler she was with started dabbling in illegal activities. Desperation drives people to dark places, and he dragged her down with him. It was a world of quick cash and quicker consequences, a far cry from the life we had lived together. Then came the news that stopped me dead in my tracks. She was implicated in a crime. It wasn't clear what her role was, but being associated with that guy, she was guilty by association in the eyes of the law. I couldn't believe it. The woman I married, now a fugitive, running from the law and the relentless debt collectors that were on their tail. But the most devastating blow was yet to come. Amidst this chaos, she received the news that her mother had passed away. She was completely unaware, caught up in her own turmoil. The thought of her dealing with this heartache, alone and in such dire circumstances, was too much to bear. Then the inevitable happened. During a police raid, she was arrested. The image of her, handcuffed and being led away by the police, was splashed across the local news. It was a public fall from grace, a spectacle for all to see. Sitting in the silence of our empty home, the reality of our shattered lives hit me. The woman I once shared my dreams with was now a shell of her former self, caught in a web of bad decisions and worse company. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and a deep sense of loss. The life we built, the love we shared, was now just a memory, tarnished by the harsh realities of the choices she made. This chapter in our story was one of heartbreak and tragedy. It was a stark reminder of how quickly life can unravel, how the choices we make can lead us down paths we never intended to tread. The woman I loved, my partner and confidant, was now a stranger, lost in a world of trouble and despair. And I, once her protector and ally, could do nothing but watch as her world came crashing down around her. I remember the day I heard about her standing in that courtroom, abandoned and alone. The guy she left everything for had vanished, a ghost in the wind, leaving her to face the music by herself. It was like a scene from a tragic movie, except this was real, and it was happening to the woman I once vowed to spend my life with. In that cold, unforgiving cell, she had nothing but time to reflect on the choices that led her there. The glamour of the casinos, the thrill of the gamble, the allure of a stranger's attention, all fleeting, leaving her with nothing but regret and a heavy heart. Meanwhile, I was finalizing our divorce. It was a surreal feeling, signing those papers. Part of me still couldn't believe it had come to this. The process was straightforward since she wasn't there to contest it. By the time the judge's gavel fell, she had lost everything. Our home, our savings, the life we had built together, all gone in her absence. A mutual friend, one of the few who hadn't turned their back on her completely, visited her in jail. I wonder what went through her mind when she heard about my life now. The promotions, the travels, the semblance of normalcy I'd managed to rebuild. Did it sting, knowing what could have been? Or did it bring a sense of relief, knowing at least one of us found solid ground? The most defining moment came when she was offered a plea deal. It was her only way out, but it came with a hefty price. A lengthy sentence. I heard about it through the grapevine, the hushed conversations of our once shared friends. There was a debate, a weighing of odds, but in the end, she accepted, resigning herself to the consequences of her actions. Accepting that deal must have been like admitting defeat, acknowledging the irreversible impact of her decisions. It marked the end of her fight, the closing of a chapter filled with chaos and loss. Sitting alone in the quiet of the evening, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow for her. Our story, which had started with such promise, had spiraled into a tale of loss and regret. The woman I had loved, vibrant and full of life, was now a shadow of her former self, confined within the walls of a prison cell, paying the price for the choices she made. It was a somber chapter in our lives, one that I never anticipated when we first met. It served as a harsh reminder that life is a series of choices, and each one can lead us down paths we never intended to tread. The story of us, which once held so much hope and love, had ended in a way neither of us could have ever imagined. The news came in fragments, whispers of her life behind bars. It wasn't easy for her, that much was clear. She was an outcast in prison, her past a scarlet letter that marked her among the other inmates. I often wondered how she was coping, adapting to a reality so harsh and unforgiving. It was a far cry from the life we once shared. Then came the news that shook her world even more. I had remarried. I can only imagine how that must have felt, hearing about it in the confines of her cell. The life we had, the dreams we shared, now permanently part of a past that seemed like another lifetime. It pained me to think of her in despair, but life had to move on. Amidst all this, the stranger she ran away with met a grim end. Found dead, his demise was as murky as the life he led, suspected to be linked to his criminal activities. I couldn't help but wonder if she felt any guilt, any responsibility for being entangled in his dangerous world. It was during this time that a detective approached her. They were investigating the stranger's past, trying to untangle the web of crimes he was involved in. She was a key piece in this puzzle, reluctantly holding information that could shed light on his dark dealings. With much hesitation, she cooperated. It was a difficult choice, dredging up memories and details of a time she probably wanted to forget. But she did it, revealing everything she knew about the man who had turned her life upside down. Her cooperation led to a major criminal bust. It was a significant development, one that reverberated through the news. The woman I once knew, now a pivotal figure in unraveling a criminal network. It was surreal, thinking of her in this new role, a far cry from the person I thought I knew. Sitting alone, pondering these developments, I couldn't help but feel a complex mix of emotions. There was a sense of relief that some justice was being served, but also a profound sadness for the path her life had taken. The choices she made, the consequences she faced, it was a tale of caution, a reminder of how easily life can spiral out of control. This chapter of our story was marked by revelations and realizations. The woman I married, who had once been my partner and confidant, was now a stranger, shaped and hardened by the experiences she had endured. Her involvement in the criminal bust was a turning point, a moment that highlighted the depths of her fall and the faint glimmer of redemption that still lingered in the darkest of places. The day her story hit the media, it was like watching a storm unfold from the sidelines. The detective, aiming to help reduce her sentence, had inadvertently opened the floodgates. Her face was plastered across news outlets, her story a sensational headline. She was painted as the villain, a woman who abandoned her husband for a life of crime and chaos. Public opinion was swift and brutal. Social media erupted with criticisms and harsh judgments about her choices. I saw comments calling her every name under the sun, dissecting her life as if it were a cautionary tale. It was hard to watch, knowing the woman they were vilifying was once the love of my life. Then came the moment I had to speak out. It was a tough decision, but I felt compelled to share my side of the story. When I publicly denounced her actions, citing her betrayal, it wasn't out of spite. It was a painful acknowledgement of the hurt and upheaval her choices had caused. I hoped it might bring some closure, not just for me, but for both of us. But inside the prison walls, things were even worse for her. The news of her involvement in criminal activities, her role in the major bust, made her a target. She faced threats and hostility from other inmates, her notoriety a curse in an already hostile environment. I heard about these incidents through the grapevine, each report a blow to my conscience. Sitting alone, reflecting on these events, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sadness. Our lives had taken such drastically different paths since that fateful night at the resort. Her decisions, which had seemed so inconsequential at the time, had spiraled into a life-altering saga that played out for the world to see. This chapter in our story was one of stark contrasts. There she was, struggling to survive in the harsh reality of prison, while her tale was dissected and judged by the outside world. And here I was, a spectator to the fallout, trying to reconcile the woman I knew with the figure being portrayed in the media. It was a harsh reminder of the power of choices and consequences. The woman I once shared my dreams with was now a cautionary tale, her story a complex weave of mistakes, regret, and the harsh glare of public scrutiny. And I, once her partner and confidant, was left to grapple with the echoes of our past, watching from afar as her life unfolded in the most tragic of ways. The day she lost her appeal for a reduced sentence, it felt like the final nail in the coffin of her already shattered life. Public opinion had swayed the scales of justice, and her fate was sealed. It was a harsh reminder of how unforgiving the world can be, how a single mistake can alter the course of a life forever. Inside those prison walls, she was more isolated than ever. With no allies and a tarnished reputation, she faced each day with a resilience I never knew she had. I heard bits and pieces about her life in prison, the struggles, the small victories, the endless days and nights spent grappling with the ruins of the life she once knew. It was a stark contrast to the vibrant, carefree woman I married, a transformation wrought by a cascade of poor choices and harsh consequences. Then came the day of her release. It should have been a day of relief, a chance to start over. But for her, it was just another day of uncertainty. With no home to return to, no friends to call on, and a reputation in tatters, she faced the outside world alone. I couldn't help but wonder, as she walked out of those prison gates, what was going through her mind. Did she regret the choices she made? Did she long for the life we once shared? I caught a glimpse of her on the news, a brief shot of her taking those first steps into her new reality. There was no fanfare, no tearful reunions, just a solitary figure stepping into an uncertain future. It was a moment that summed up the tragedy of her story. A woman who once had everything, now left with nothing but the memories of her fall from grace. As she disappeared into the crowd, a part of me wanted to reach out, to offer a helping hand. But I knew it was too late for that. Our paths had diverged long ago, our lives now worlds apart. The woman I once loved was now a stranger, marked by her past and facing a future full of unknowns. This chapter of our story was a somber one. It was a tale of loss, of regret, of the harsh realities that follow when we stray too far from the path. The woman who walked away that day was a shadow of her former self, her journey a testament to the irreversible consequences of that fateful night at the resort. And I, once her partner and confidant, could only watch from a distance, a spectator to the final act of a story that had started with so much promise but ended in death.